in Mexican hands against the United States.
Mexico also mostly uses older Spanish cannons based on Napoleonic Gribeauval carriages with low-quality ammunition. Mexican cavalry, though, are highly skilled horsemen, but they suffer from a lack of coordination with infantry and artillery. The cavalry was drilled only in regiments. The artillery hardly ever maneuvered and never fired a blank shot. The general in command was never present on the field of maneuvers, so that he was unable to appreciate the respective qualities of the various bodies under his command. Geography also plays a role. The US can rapidly move troops and supplies via the Mississippi and its superior navy in the Gulf of Mexico, while Mexican troops must cross harsh desert-like conditions on foot to reach the front. Although Mexico can quickly raise large armies, it struggles to feed them, and armies often depend on camp followers like their wives and mothers for supplies. A reporter describes the so-called soldaderas. The woman of 60 or more years, the mother with her infant wrapped in her rebosa, the wife, the youthful señorita frisking along with her lover's sombrero upon her head, even the prattling girl who followed padre and madre to the wars. Mexican commanders tried to limit female camp followers to modernize logistics and remove women from harm, but they don't develop a viable alternative, and soldaderas also function as foragers, cooks, and nurses. The women also help to prevent desertion, which remains common due to irregular pay. Mexican officers often avoid aggressive maneuvers so they can keep their troops under close supervision. But desertion is not just a Mexican problem. Before hostilities open, around 200 US troops defect. Many joined the artillery-focused San Patricio battalion, most of which is Catholic and 40% of which is Irish. Mexico offers incentives for defectors, although US anti-Catholic sentiment also contributes. Polk hopes his declaration of war and a $10 million war chest will quickly mobilize a new army. But even before his May 13th declaration, decisive battles are being fought. On May 1st, Taylor marches with 2,200 men from Fort Texas to secure his supply depot at Point Isabel. Mexican General Mariano Arista, now the only Mexican army in the north after Paredes moved south, intercepts Taylor.
Good evening, and welcome to the March meeting of the Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable. We welcome back all of our members, and I think we also have some new members and some guests. If you're new or a new member or a guest, why don't you raise your hand? Great. Well, thank you very much. We hope you enjoy this and return. As most of you know, this is a first for the roundtable. We have a C-SPAN, American History TV is recording this for broadcasting later. We'll let all of our members know when that date comes about. And I want to give a thanks to the crew, the guys from Crew West Video Productions, who have been setting up all this and be recording it. I also wanted to introduce, we've talked about, and you've seen in our newsletter, the mention of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Arizona State, which we partnered with. Several of their members were on our bus tour at Picancho Peak. Several of us I've taken a class, for instance, with them on the Stoneman Road, and they offer a fascinating array of classes for those in our age bracket. And we have with us tonight the director, Jared Swerzinski. Is Jared, are you here? Yeah, just to say hi, and we want to thank you for all your support. As mentioned, I don't know if you did notice it in the last newsletter, September through January of next year, first part of the season, we will not have this library available, auditorium available to us. There's renovation work going on in the city council chambers, and they're going to be in here, and use will be restricted. We will be meeting in those months at the Mustang Library, which is up at 90th and Shea, and we'll be sending you more information about that as we get closer. It's a nice accommodation. The seating is a little more limited to about 150, but it should be adequate for our needs. I also wanted to mention, as a follow-up to our Picacho Peak tour, we are planning another tour, another bus tour, in next January, which would center on 19th century Tucson and its connections with the Civil War. It would involve a morning tour of the Presidio, a luncheon with a speaker on Tucson during the Civil War, and then an afternoon tour of Fort Lowell, which was founded after the Civil War, but founded and commanded by a number of Civil War veterans. One's a former Union general. Another commander of the fort was fought at Antietam, at Gettysburg, at Petersburg. And the location of the fort was selected by General George Crook, who's also well known to those of us who are interested in the Civil War. And finally, I would like to mention our next history group discussion, our history discussion group will be meeting on Thursday, March 26th at Wildflower Cafe at Indian Bend and Scottsdale Road. The discussion will be, in what ways did the Civil War permanently change the United States? And it's for those of you who've been, you know, it's a pretty free-flowing, open discussion. Usually we have, 50 people or so there. We had a great discussion last month on General Lee's generalship. A lot of controversy, a lot of great discussion around that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Taylor, our program chair, to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Taylor, the program coordinator for the Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable. And tonight, we're very excited to welcome Roseann Bacha-Garza, who is a lecturer in history at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which is also home to an organization called CHAPS, which is the Community Historical Archaeological Project with schools. That is also the organization that runs the Civil War Trail of the Rio Grande Valley, which if you had time to stop outside, hopefully you picked up a map of that trail. Roseann is also the author of at least 3 books. And if you didn't have time before the program, hopefully there'll be time afterwards to pick up a copy. Anyway, with that said, I'm going to welcome her up to the stage. Put your hands together for Roseann Bacha-Garza. Thank
you. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, John Taylor, Mark, everybody in this Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable that invited me here today and made this trip possible. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here to speak with you about the work that we've done down on the border, the US-Mexico border, along the Rio Grande, that has to do with the Civil War era in our US history. So I want to explain just quickly how we started this whole program. Like John said, I'm part of the CHAPS program at UTRGV, and our founding director, Dr. Russell Skowronek, and his colleague, our colleague in the history department, Dr. Christopher Miller, were talking with each other one day about the upcoming sesquicentennial observation. This was about 2013. And they knew that there were events that occurred along the Rio Grande during the US Civil War, but they had a feeling that a lot of that history was largely overlooked. So at the time, I have been working at the CHAPS program since 2009, since the inception of it. And we had a graduate assistant working with us. So we put our heads together and we decided that we would task her to drive from Laredo to Boca Chica Beach which was roughly 200 miles, and give her an assignment to look up, think about, research possible places that would have had activity during the US Civil War. So we sent Samantha Bernard on this journey. So that's how we came about with deciding we wanted to open up this very interesting and intriguing and historically significant history. And Samantha did a great job putting together ideas and places and people and battles and sites of ruins that were within this 200-mile trail. She created GPS coordinates and just brief histories about it so that we could dig a little deeper. Another reason why we started this project was because Dr. Skowronek and Dr. Miller were talking in Dr. Miller's office that day and said, you know, Ken Burns did this 9-volume history about the Civil War. And there's not much talk in that documentary series about anything that happened along the US-Mexico border during that period of time. And we knew at least that the battle at Palmito Ranch or Palmito Hill occurred a whole month after Robert E. Lee had surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. And so that was another motivation as to why we wanted to push forth with this research, because we knew there was more there. And so then we had to consider deciding what topics we would cover and who we would pull in. Now I'm going to get to that in a minute, but one of our colleagues out at Texas A&M International University, his name is Dr. Jerry Thompson, a very renowned scholar about Tejanos in the military and other topics. He had this map in one of his books that showed the battles and skirmishes that happened along our 200-mile trail. So then we got more inspired and continued to do more research, knowing full well that if Dr. Thompson had already done this research, that we knew there was value in it and that we were going to pursue it. So as we continued on with our research, what I'm going to do with you today is talk to you about what we learned while we were researching and putting this whole project together, and what products we have put forth to make sure that not only people in the region we live in, but everywhere can know exactly how important events that occurred along the Rio Grande during the US Civil War were important to the outcome of the US Civil War. So here are some little known facts based on our research. Did you know that 53 lieutenants had served in the Mexican-American Army on the border at Palo Alto battlefield and other sites along the US-Mexico border, became generals in both armies, in the Confederate Army and in the Union Army. So they're cutting their teeth in the Mexican-American War side by side, becoming friends and colleagues, and then 15 years later, they're enemies. They're generals. They've risen to the rank of becoming a general, and now they're coming up with strategies against those who they served with in the previous conflict. One of those lieutenants was Ulysses S. Grant, and he became, as you all know, the 18th President of the United States. So he was a general in the Union Army during the US Civil War. Did you know that Colonel Robert E. Lee of the US Army prior to the US Civil War was at Ringgold Barracks, what we call today Fort Ringgold in Rio Grande City. He had visited and conducted some business at Ringgold Barracks before the US Civil War. Now, he was, as you probably already know, he spent time at West Point. He was assigned to be there by what would end up becoming the Confederate States of America President Jefferson Davis. He came to San Antonio in 1856 as part of court-martialing proceedings. And then he came down to the Rio Grande Valley at, well, he was down there in 1856 as well, but 1860, just before the onset of the US Civil War, he's at Ringgold Barracks trying to follow one of our folk heroes in the region, Juan Nepomuceno Cortina, who was priding himself in the region as to wanting to recapture and reclaim land that had been lost not only to his family, but others in the region as well. Excuse me. Did you know that borderland families were both in the Union and Confederate armies during this period of time? So we see here a picture in the center, the daguerreotype of Patricio Perez of a little village named Havana in the Rio Grande Valley right on the river. He had mustered into the 2nd Texas Cavalry in December of 1863, I believe, when the Union took over the Rio Grande Valley for about 6 or 7 months. His cousin, Ramon Salinas of Cardenas Tolenda's ranch, which is what we know today as Rio Grande City, had mustered into a unit called Captain Thomas's Company of Partisan Rangers, and it was a Confederate unit. They were present in the Rio Grande Valley between December of 1862 and March of 1863, and they were partisan rangers who were recruited to ride horses along the river and patrol the region. They were trying to recruit rancheros, cowboys in the area to help patrol the region. And what they would promise these rancheros, or these folks who were capable on horseback, they would promise them a rifle, a saddle, some boots, money, some pay, if they would muster in to these forces and take care of business on the river. There are a few others. The other two, Jose Lino Hinojosa and his brother-in-law, Gonzalez, also had mustered into the 2nd Texas Cavalry in Rio Grande. Well, they're from Rio Grande City. They mustered in at Fort Brown in Brownsville. And the one next to them is a Union soldier that was buried in Benitez, another riverside town in the area. Did you know that the highest ranking Spanish-speaking officer in the Confederacy was Colonel Santos Benavides of Laredo? He was in charge of a unit that he put together called the 33rd Texas Cavalry. It had been managed by another captain and colonel, but Colonel Santos Benavides was from a prominent family in Laredo. He was a direct descendant of Tomas Sanchez, the original Royal Spanish Land grantee of what we know today as Laredo, Texas. And he had high aspirations to want to become a general in the Confederate Army. And so they told him that we'll grant you, or you can earn that right as long as you put together a big enough force and unit. So he did his best to try to get enough soldiers in his unit. He fell short, so he did not get promoted to general. But he nonetheless was still part of a very prominent family in Laredo, Texas. And later on, he went on to have a very prominent political career in the Texas state legislature. The image in the middle are his brother and brother-in-law. I don't remember the names of everybody in there, but there's his family is in there. And those folks, if you were to ever visit Laredo, I think I saw somebody out at the table who was interested in going to Laredo. There is a San Agustin Plaza. It's part of our Rio Grande Valley Civil War Trail. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Benavides home and the Leyendecker home are still present on that historic plaza. Did you know that just across the Rio Grande, there was a civil war happening in Mexico during around about the same period of time between Benito Juarez and Maximilian? So we had some, like the battle at Cinco de Mayo in 1862, the 5th of May in 1862, against the French forces, was part of that period of time. Napoleon III of France had sent Maximilian of Austria to rule and govern over Mexico. And there was a civil war that broke out south of our border during this period of time between the Mexican Republican Army, meaning the Republic of Mexico's army, the liberal forces, and the Imperial Army of Mexico, meaning the forces from the ruling class of European royalty. So we had that going on during the same period of time. Did you know that prior to the American Civil War, there were families of mixed race origins comprising of a white man, a white farmer or a rancher, and his black, formerly enslaved wife or partner, life partner, and then their mixed race children, had made their way to the border down to Hidalgo County, where I live, and they were sympathetic to freedom seekers or self-emancipators, those who were enslaved in the South, and who, instead of wanting to travel north to states like Ohio and New York and cross over the border into Canada, they knew that there were opportunities for them to achieve freedom once they crossed the river into Mexico. So these families, the Weber family, came from what we know today as Austin, Texas. There is a village there that is named after them. It's called Weberville. When they were living there, it was called Weber's Prairie. And it's about a 5-hour drive to the river, to the Rio Grande River, in today's world. So imagine what kind of trip that would have been overland in wagons during that period of time. The other family, excuse me, was the Jackson family. They came from Wilcox County, Alabama. Same situation, a white man a Black formerly enslaved partner. They actually never got married because in Alabama, it was against the law, especially to have mixed race marriages. The Webbers actually married while Texas was still part of Mexico and it was legal, but the Jacksons did not. Nonetheless, they lived as a family, they functioned as a family, and in 1857, they embarked on a over 900-mile overland journey through Texas and to the border. The Webbers had settled there in 1852, 1853, a few years before they got there. And they settled near this like-minded family and set up their own community and were assisting freedom seekers across the river to freedom in Mexico. Both families had licensed ferry landings at their properties and were subsisting by selling the hides and excess produce to steamboats on licensed ferries. So they were actively assisting freedom seekers across the river to freedom in Mexico during this period of time. Did you know that the U.S. colored troops fought in the Rio Grande Valley during the U.S. Civil War? There were a few of the regiments that arrived in 1864, and they fought at Palmito Ranch Battlefield at the last land battle of the U.S. Civil War, May 12th and 13th, 1865. But while they were here and stationed at Brazo Santiago in segregated camps, their leaders were very hard and strict with them. They did not want the soldiers, and the leaders were white men. There were no, at least in the Rio Grande Valley, there were no Black officers managing this group. So we had these white officers wanting them to not stand idle. They wanted them to learn how to read and write, which ended up benefiting a lot of these soldiers later on in their military service. But the U.S. colored troops, or U.S. colored infantry, the 62nd from Missouri, led by Colonel David Branson and Colonel Theodore Barrett, were, or at least after they mustered out and later on in life, as they were utilizing the skills that they learned while encamped in these segregated camps, were able to raise money to start a university, Lincoln Institute, now Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. So there was strict rules that these U.S. colored troops had to abide by. And they were able to utilize those skills that they learned to their benefits after the war was over. Up in the upper left-hand corner here, you're going to see a regiment from the 84th U.S. Colored Troops. One of the things I've learned while looking into the U.S. Colored Troops who served down in the Rio Grande Valley, there were many different regiments, and they ended up becoming regrouped and renamed. So, we have evidence that the 81st was camped in a segregated camp. We have the 81st here. We also have, in addition to the 62nd, we have the 87th and the 91st. So there were several groups that came down, but they ended up becoming regrouped into other numbered regiments while they were down serving in the Rio Grande Valley. Also, over the period of time where the U.S. colored or Black soldiers were mustering into these units after General Order Number 43 was passed down, allowing these African American people to muster into the Union Army. There were over 200,000 of them that eventually mustered in across the Union forces, which ended up comprising 10 to 15% of the entire Union Army during the years of the US Civil War. So that was a pretty significant number. At the border, at the river, the US-Mexico border, 16,000 of these US colored troops were sent to the border. First, to fight and protect the border, and then after, sorry, this is that map I was telling you about. This is the US 81st Segregated Infantry. This is the 34th Indiana Volunteers. So this is an all-white unit, and this is the US colored troops, 81st. And this map is very large. I just wanted to blow it up so that you can see the segregated troops. And then what's listed on the right side of this slide are regional Hispanics who also mustered in to some of these US colored troop regiments. So did you know that following the US Civil War, these African American troops were held back and stationed at the various forts along the Rio Grande to rebuild the forts if they were damaged at all during the fighting, and to protect the border from Confederates who were already over the border in Mexico and wanting to regroup and come back and start the war over again. So they were protecting the border from that and protecting themselves from possible future enslavement. They did not want any of those Confederate soldiers to successfully get back over the border and restart this war all over again. So they had a personal interest in this topic. They were also patrolling the river to assist with any type of other incursions that were happening during that period of time. There were Native American groups who were obviously upset about being dispossessed of their land and wanting to fight back and get their lands back. So these US colored troops were also designed to protect the region from any other type of incursion that was coming about at the time. So these buildings here, this is the post hospital at Ringgold Barracks, or Fort Ringgold. This is the cavalry building, which is at Fort Brown in Brownsville. And this is the bakery at Fort McIntosh in Laredo. Now, we know that these buildings, these two for sure, the wooden buildings were built during and just after the US Civil War on these, at these forts, at these fort compounds. Okay, so here's what we concluded after doing a little bit more digging, because one of the things we wanted to prove with our hypotheses was the importance of what was happening on the river at the transnational border the United States and Mexico during this period of time, because you probably already know the topic of the US Civil War is the most written about topic in our country, of our nation's history. We had such a hard time finding anybody who would only simply mention in a paragraph at the end of a book about the last land battle of the Civil War at Palmito Ranch. Nothing more beyond that. So we had to come up with something that was like a wow factor. So here goes. In 1861, the Confederate Treasury had $47 million in it. In 1860s currency, from their period of time. And that made the Confederacy, once they seceded, the 5th wealthiest country in the world. That's pretty interesting, right? Now, I know many of you have read books, watched movies. You know that the Union Army was more uniform, pun intended. They were basically well-dressed, or at least dressed in their blue jackets, dark blue jackets, light blue pants. The Union government had the money to outfit their soldiers. The Confederate Army didn't. They kind of ran out of money rapidly, or were really looking for ways to replenish their coffers. So during the US Civil War, the trade and commerce that was happening along the Rio Grande with regard to, let's say, shipping goods and products up the Rio Grande, back down the Rio Grande, supplying ships from all over the world out in the Gulf of Mexico, waiting for cotton, salt, other war material such as guns, ammunition, medicine. That trade along the US-Mexico border generated over $162 million in currency of 1860s currency. And that money was to the benefit of the Confederacy, because as you all know, Texas was a Confederate state. And the reason they were so successful in doing that was because the folks who were the merchants and the traders, steamboat owners, steamboat captains, other big business people, in our traveling museum exhibit, we call them entrepreneurs, but we can also call them war profiteers and merchants of death. But they were flying the Mexican flag on those steamboats so that the Union Army would not blockade the trade on the Rio Grande. So all of that was happening. Now, every time I look up what is $162 million in today's currency, I keep getting different things. So anywhere between $5 and $6 billion in our money today. So that's a lot of money in our money, $6 billion. And when you think about the Confederacy starting off with 47 million, depleting most of their funds pretty rapidly, 162 million to them, could go a long way and kept funding the war, therefore they could keep on going. So we argue that in addition to keeping the Confederacy afloat during the 4 years of the US Civil War, had that trade been blocked, had the Union Army been able to block that trade and stop all of that commerce, and the Confederacy not be able to benefit from the funds earned during that period of time along the river, that the Civil War probably would have ended about a year earlier. And for those of you who are very well read, which I'm sure there's a lot of you here, you know that most of the battles during the last year of the US Civil War were the most bloody, were where the most people died in these battles. So we argue that perhaps there would have been maybe 100,000 people not died or permanently maimed and disabled from the battles that occurred in that last year. So we feel that we have proven the value of the events that occurred along the US Civil War to the outcome of the US Civil War. And maybe value is not the right word, but the significance of it all. So we feel that our region was definitely a significant player throughout the US Civil War. Another thing that people don't know or pay much attention to is that we had our own battles and skirmishes along the river during this period of time. So I call these battles that we had in the Rio Grande Valley, these bookend battles. So the second battle, and I call it the second battle because the first battle wasn't really, it was a confrontation. Happened around about, the same time Fort Sumter was attacked in April of 1861. So in Zapata County, with their main town called Carrizo, they were arguing whether or not they wanted to be in the Confederacy. There was contingents in the region that did not want to pledge allegiance to the Confederacy. So they had a confrontation. They thought they were going at least, Ochoa thought he was bringing his Union forces to a ranch nearby, El Clareño, to kind of go to neutral corners, but they were attacked and massacred a couple days later. So that happened April 15th, 1861, just a couple days after Fort Sumter. And as I have mentioned a couple of times, we had the last land battle of the US Civil War occurring near Brownsville at Palmito Ranch or Palmetto Hill, because there is a hill there, May 12th and 13th, 1865. So that battle occurred 1 month, a little bit more than 1 month after Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. And so some people, when I give this presentation, some people will say, oh, well, in the Rio Grande Valley, we probably didn't know the war was over. But we actually did know the war was over. We had a lot of steamboats coming up the river from New Orleans. They were bringing newspapers, and people in the region knew the war was over. But what they were doing, like I said before when I was talking about US colored troops, they were tasked to protect the region from any Confederates who had gone over the river to try to regroup and come back over and start the war again. There was also over 1,000 bales of cotton at Fort Brown in Brownsville. That was part of the Confederacy that those troops would have wanted to get a hold of so that they could sell them and put more money back into the coffers of the Confederacy. So we did know the war was over, but we didn't think it was really over. We thought that Jefferson Davis was going to be making his way back over the border. But what ended up happening was, and I'm sorry, this slide has got a lot of little words. So Jefferson Davis flees Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy at the time. He knows it's over, so he's heading to Mexico. And on April 9th, we have Appomattox Courthouse and the surrender of Robert E. Lee. And the Army of Northern Virginia is disbanded by this time. So, unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated a couple days later. You know, we could even argue that had the war been over a year before, maybe President Lincoln would not have been assassinated. We don't know, it's just speculation, but it's an idea just put out there. So we've got other generals who are surrendering, even though, you know, they weren't wanting to because General Lee already did. But by May 1st, we have these rumors that Jefferson Davis is heading for Texas and then therefore heading over the border into Mexico. And so I think I believe they did try to set up a new Confederate capital in Virginia at the time. I think it was at Danville, hoping for the best. But by May 11th, Union troops moved to take Brownsville and protect the region as they were tasked to do. So there were actually, I said 1,000, there were 2,000 bales of cotton at Fort Brown that ended up being lit on fire. And the Union forces were trying to defeat the Confederate forces in that region. So they embark upon that last land battle of the US Civil War, and at Palmito Ranch, as well as where the last shots were taken, were about 6 miles to the east at White's Ranch. I'll show you a picture of that location in a little bit. And so what ends up happening is the Confederates win, but Jefferson Davis is caught on May the 10th in Georgia. So the battle ensues because, well, we didn't have what we know today as instant news, right? So May the 10th, he's caught. News did not travel quite that fast. So the battle continues to go. It's also noted that one of the colonels from the 62nd, I think his name is Theodore Barrett, really wanted to push for a battle win as a Union officer. So there was a push to have the battle at Palmito Ranch begin, but the Union forces did not win, so that plan was moot. So May 12th and 13th, we have the Battle of Palmito Ranch, being the last land battle of the US Civil War. So how did we develop this project? How did we bring it to the community? So what we do at the CHAPS program at UTRGV is bring to light some very, what I call interesting, intriguing, and historically significant aspects of borderland history to light, so that the people, not only the people who have lived there all their lives, we've got winter Texans there between October 1st and April 1st every year. Our population swells with people from the northern states, but we also, it's a very transnational region, so our friends south of the border in Mexico were very, very much a part of this history as well. So what we did after Dr. Skowronek and Dr. Miller put their heads together and said, hey, we need to pursue this as a project, as a heritage tourism, cultural heritage tourism project and historic preservation project. None of us were really Civil War historians, but we research in the region, and we know plenty of people who research in the region, whether they are avocational historians, whether they are with the local museums, there are other professors at the universities down there, with the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Chambers of Commerce, all these different historical commissions. We put together a group that's roughly 50 people there. Or we invited over 50 people. We got almost everybody to come. It was a 6-hour day. We fed them. Food brings people to the table. And so we asked them if they would all be willing to help us bring their own area of expertise to light so that we could continue the project and expand upon what they felt was important information, events that occurred, important people of the region, battles, battle sites, things like that. So we brought them together and we asked for their help. When we started asking them for help, we kind of laugh when we think about it. Toward the end of the 6-hour workshop, you know, we start to tell them, well, we want to ask you something, and people start looking at their shoes or opening up their phone or maybe excusing themselves because they thought we were going to ask them for money. We didn't ask them for money. We just asked them to write 1 page about their area of expertise, and then we took it from there. So those of you who may be business owners or, you know, part of teams out there, I think part of having a successful organization is putting a good team of people together. So one of the books that we were selling out there at the table was the scholarly edited anthology about all the interesting history aspects of the U.S. Civil War along the Rio Grande. And so we found out, like beforehand, we knew some of them, but we continued to put this together. And in the book, one of the books that that I have for sale on the table is this scholarly edited anthology. So we put together 11 chapters with 11 different authors with 11 different areas of expertise. And so we think we've come up with a pretty comprehensive view of what happened during the U.S. Civil War on our transnational border at the Rio Grande. So we have, well, Gary Gallagher did not write a chapter, but he wrote our foreword. So as you probably know, he's and I believe he's retired now, but he was the John Now III Chair for Civil War Studies at UVA. And so he wrote the foreword. Dr. Miller, that's Dr. Christopher Miller, who was part of the inception of this whole program. He wrote a chapter about the region and how it came to be prior to the U.S. Civil War. Dr. Douglas Murphy from the National Park Service was the one who wrote about those 53 lieutenants who became generals in the U.S. Civil War and fighting against each other, among other military aspects. He was the chief interpreter at Palo Alto Battlefield down there in Brownsville at the time. So he wrote a chapter about those military issues. Mary Margaret McAllen, I come from McAllen, Texas, here to you today. And her great-great-grandfather, John McAllen, was the namesake for our town. And he was a merchant from Ireland, partnering with a friend who was also a merchant from Scotland, Edinburgh, Scotland, and talking about trade and commerce along the Rio Grande during this period of time. Who the players were, where they were from, because they were from all over the world, speaking multiple languages on the Rio Grande during the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. It was a very cosmopolitan region. And there I am. I wrote about the Underground Railroad traffic through South Texas into Mexico. I've described that already to you. And then Dr. Levinson, his area of expertise is Mexico and what was going on south of the border during that period of time. So he was very important to talk about what was going on the other side of the border, and how we were affecting them and how they were affecting us. I've already also mentioned Dr. Jerry Thompson, Texas A&M International. He's a Regents Professor of History for the Texas A&M system. He has written several books. I believe what they say is he's written so many books that if he were to stack them up next to himself, they would be taller than he is. The pile would be taller than he is. He's a wonderful professor, a great colleague, and is very, very knowledgeable. He's been in Laredo for probably 40 years or more. He's very highly respected in that city and just is extremely knowledgeable, very well read and very well researched, and was a big contributor to this project. Karen Fort and Tom Fort are regional historians from the Rio Grande Valley. Tom had just retired a couple months ago from the Museum of South Texas History. He was the senior historian. He had been there since the 70s. I think 1978 he got there. Also one to dive deep into the history of the Rio Grande Valley. Was a also big contributor to our project. His wife Karen is also a regional historian and was responsible for turning the Robert E. Lee House at the Ringgold Barracks, or at Fort Ringgold, into a museum. And so she got some grant money to get that done. So now when you go to Rio Grande City, you can visit that museum on the grounds of Fort Ringgold. Steve McBride he's retired now also, but he was the chief interpreter at Camp Nelson Civil War Park, which is where many U.S. colored troops mustered in during the U.S. Civil War and were sent down to the Rio Grande Valley to serve. Those units were the 114th, 116th, 117th, 118th. They mustered in there. And he came down to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas as a very good friend of Dr. Russell Skowronek. And when Russ took him on a tour of the region and showed him Fort Ringgold, he said, "My guys were here," and he told Russ that Fort Ringgold, in his view, was one of the best preserved 19th century military forts in our country. And he prompted him, or I'll say pinched, because today is St. Patrick's Day and I'm not wearing green, so I'll just pinch myself. But Steve McBride prompted Russell Skowronek to start this project and do everything we can to preserve that fort. Rolando Garza was a chief archaeologist at the Palo Alto battlefield and does battlefield archaeology. So he's done all the research at Palmito Ranch Battlefield. So he wrote a chapter in the book about that. Jim Leiker also studies Black military history. So he contributed to what we learned about the African American experience and along the Rio Grande during the U.S. Civil War and after the U.S. Civil War. And then Russell Skowronek pulled in the conclusion to discuss, kind of pull everything in, and then also discuss about ways in which we can preserve the history down there. So we had a really, really great team of people putting this idea together. So how are we disseminating this knowledge now? Okay, so we were able to put together the good team, what I would call a most excellent team, but how are we bringing it to the public? So many of you got the Civil War map, the Rio Grande Valley Civil War Trail map that we put together, this 200-mile trail. It's a tourism guide map. What we hope happens when people pick up our maps is that they come to the Rio Grande Valley and drive the trail, starting at Boca Chica Beach outside of Brownsville and driving the 200 miles up to Webb County, where Laredo is, and then stopping and exploring all the sites in between and learning more about the history that you may not have otherwise known. We've published books. So like I said, all three of these books are on the table outside. Some of you have already come by and taken advantage of that. So this book is the scholarly edited anthology. Dr. Miller and Dr. Schronik and myself were the editors of this book, but yet all three of us contributed a chapter as well. So that's a scholarly edited anthology. Each chapter is at least 25 to 30 pages long, so it's a deep dive into the history. This book, Blue and Gray on the Border, the Rio Grande Valley Civil War Trail, is more of a pictorial history book. A lot of color pictures, a lot of old pictures against modern day pictures of similar sites. And we wrote this book as, we put it together with regard to all the different counties that comprise the Rio Grande Valley of Texas: Cameron County, Hidalgo County, Starr County, Zapata County, Webb County, and a few other areas north of the river. So this is our tourism guidebook. The person who wrote, so the three of us wrote this book, but the person who wrote the foreword for this book was John Now, the one who has the endowed professorship at UVA. So he's the chief in charge of the Texas Historical Commission and was interested in writing the foreword for us because this is all about bringing people to the Rio Grande Valley and discovering our unique history. And then this book is what we call a popular book. It's written at a 7th grade level. There's only 78 pages. It is everything you wanted to know about the Rio Grande Valley in the Civil War era in a very kind of condensed and quick form. So it's not as detailed, obviously, as the scholarly edited anthology, but nonetheless, depending on your patience level and your desire to learn, you may want to be interested in a little bit of a quicker read. Oops. So other things that we do is we have created traveling trunks for K through 12 education. We partner with local teachers. We are in the state of Arizona right now, but in Texas, our teachers are required to implement lesson plans in our classrooms that align with the Texas Education, Knowledge, and Skills requirements, which is abbreviated as the TEKS. So we apply for some grant money, we handle these workshops, we task our teachers, our K through 12 teachers, to write lesson plans and curriculum that go along with the items that are in the trunk. So we hold these 6-hour professional development workshops all up and down the Rio Grande Valley, and we give out the trunks to the different school districts that send their teachers to our workshops. So we have the 56 lesson plan book, and then that popular book is the teacher's guidebook to the lesson plans. and the items that are in the trunk. So it's a package deal. So, because last year we had a Texas Historical Commission marker installed at the site where the last shots of the Battle of Palmito Ranch happened, and there's a smaller ranch site called White's Ranch that had its own ferry landing nearby. That was where that those last shots occurred. Those last shots occurred with the Union forces present through the 62nd U.S. Colored Troops out of Missouri, Company F out of Missouri, the 34th Indiana Volunteers, the white group out of Indiana, and one of their soldiers, John Jefferson Williams, was the last casualty at that battle. And then the Texas Cavalry, the 2nd Texas Cavalry, and that was a Tejano unit. So it was a mixture of different peoples who were fighting against the Confederates for those last shots of the U.S. Civil War. Rip Ford, Colonel John Solomon Rip Ford, was the leader of the Confederate forces. The 33rd Texas Cavalry was there also. Colonel Santos Benavides wasn't present, but his family members as officers were present, and they did defeat the Union forces at that battle. But like I mentioned to you, it was didn't matter. Jefferson Davis was caught and the war was officially over. So one of my colleagues out of Houston, out of the African American Living History site in Leendo, at the Leendo Plantation, her name is Naomi Carrier, and when she learned about the Civil War in the Rio Grande, and especially the U.S. Colored Troops that had served there, she wanted to make sure that she wrote up an application to the Texas Historical Commission to have a marker there. So here we are. That's me on the end here. This is Naomi Carrier. This is Steve Cure, who is the military historian for the Texas Historical Commission. These are my students who I dragged out to do a park cleanup day where we were picking up trash along the highway and helping Steve Cure out at the battlefield. We've got some folks there from U.S. Fish Wildlife in the back. I think that's Scott Edler in the back. Valerie Bates from the city of Port Isabel. So we were there to unveil and have a ceremony for this very important marker. One thing you may notice in the background, does anybody know what that is? Do I hear it? SpaceX. Yeah. That's how close. This is Starbase right here. These are the mega towers, and the rocket launch is kind of, Steve's so tall, but it's behind where Steve is over here at the beach. So we are about almost 2 miles from Starbase, from that spot. So that's a point of interest for the folks where I live who are trying to preserve the regional's cultural and natural history. And then just a map that Steve prepared for us. This is Palmito Ranch battlefield, and this is White's Ranch, and then this is Boca Chica Beach out here. So our trail starts right here, and it goes all the way along Highway 4, and then upriver all the way to Laredo. So this is where those last shots occurred. And the U.S. Colored Troop marker is standing today. We also have, everything we do is bilingual because we know where we live. We are very friendly with our partners across the river in Mexico, and many of us, including myself, I'm not 100% bilingual, but I'm almost there. A lot of us already speak Spanish. So we are very cognizant of where we live and the fact that we want our materials to be read and understood by everybody. So everything we've done is, or most everything we've done is bilingual. And this is this is part of our traveling museum exhibit. It has been traveling since February of 2019. It has been to probably 20 different venues already, has been seen by over 90,000 visitors, and it's still going strong. So right now it's in Zapata, Texas. It'll be there till the middle of April. Then it's going to Rockport, Texas, which is about 3 hours north of where we are. And then after that, it's going to San Antonio. So, you know, we cater to our immediate region, but we want this material at other places. Because we're educators and we're professors, we bring this information to the classroom. So when we launched this museum exhibit in February of 2019, we conducted an upper level undergraduate and graduate level course to get our students completely knowledgeable about everything that we've learned about the U.S. Civil War. And yes, they had to buy those books that we have out there because they had to read that material, because after they installed this exhibit, so you have our students here, they're installing the exhibit, we've got mannequins, we've got banners, we've got artifacts in some glass cases. Then they were the docents for the 4 months it was standing at our university, and that we saw 4,000 visitors in those 4 months. So they were the ones teaching everybody who was coming in about this valuable history. We've got 2 short films. I'm not going to show them right now. They're both 9-minute films. One has to do with cotton trade along the Rio Grande, and the other one has to do with U.S. colored troops that served along the Rio Grande. And they're on our YouTube, our UTRGV Chaps YouTube page and our website. And we are currently increasing the number of these signs around the region so that drivers and travelers can know that we've got battle sites and other places. So I just got some grant money last year to install 10 of these signs between, let's say, Zapata County and Hidalgo County. I think we're kind of, they're all over, but we got a little bit of extra money to make 10 more of these signs at 10 different locations. And that's it.
All right, we're going to do some questions. I'm gonna start by asking you to maybe tell us a little bit about Santos Benavides and his importance in the Confederacy in the Civil War.
Wow. Well, Jerry Thompson's the expert on Colonel Santos Benavides. So what I know is that being a descendant of the original Spanish land grantee afforded the Benavides family some privilege and status in Laredo at the time. And he was, and with his family members and in-laws, were mustering into the Confederacy at the time and very devoted to it. On March 19th, 1864, his unit successfully repelled a 200 soldier unit, Union unit, at Zacate Creek in Laredo because they were protecting 500 bales of cotton in San Agustin Plaza. So Santos Benavides was also, not only was he very knowledgeable about the region and friendly with people who he could benefit from or they could help each other, he was also a slave catcher and bounty hunter. So with regard to my research of Underground Railroad traffic through South Texas into Mexico, there are newspaper articles out there that describe him as a slave catcher, apprehending freedom seekers in Laredo. He and Colonel Rip Ford were very interested in doing that and were very active crossing the border, and part of an interest in wanting to, in a section of Mexico south of the border, the Sierra Madre Republic, in wanting to create an area in Mexico that had already abolished slavery, an area that would acknowledge slavery. So that's what I know. But Jerry Thompson knows a lot more.
We've got a couple questions right here.
Yes, thank you. I can't wait to read your books here in a little more detail. You spoke a lot about trade and cotton along the Rio Grande and how the colored troops came in, occupying some of these forts to repel Confederates coming out of Mexico, whatever. Can you talk a little bit more about the ebb and flow of the battles, or were there any early in the Civil War between the Confederates and Union in the Rio Grande area?
Well, like I had mentioned, the confrontation at Carrizo happened right when the U.S. Civil War came out, because there were people at least in Zapata, in Zapata County, who were not wanting to enter into the Confederacy. As you can imagine, or if you can imagine, the borderland region of Texas was so really very far away from the rest of happenings that were going on in Texas. And they, since the 1740s, when the Spanish colonial settlers came in, they always, the folks who had settled along the Rio Grande really wanted to be their own people. And many of them were not that interested in converting to the Confederacy. Even though they were a slave state, they still were functioning along the river and south of the river as if nothing had changed, So with regard to the ebb and flow, if you were to go on our website and look at, you could surf it from the comfort of your own home, and you go through each county. At least if you go through Zapata County, you'll see different battles that occurred in that region. 1861, you had the confrontation of Carrizo, and then the battle at El Clareño. Later on, you had, in 1863, you had another battle at El Clareño and at Rancho Soledad and Ramireño. So there were battles that were occurring because of Colonel Santos Benavides wanting to control the area. Zapata is not that far from Laredo. Today, it's a 1-hour drive, basically. And having the communication with folks across the river, like Santos Benavides had, they were able to have their finger on the pulse of what was going on. So there were battles during all those years, but battles and skirmishes, not large battles like at Gettysburg and other places that we know in the north. Battles along the river that happened.
All right, we go. Another question here.
My question concerns the cotton trade also. You mentioned some staggering figure that was generated by the cotton trade. Was there any research or any evidence that the Confederate leadership at any time attempted to access that money, or was it just going to the profiteers?
Well, those funds did go back to the Confederacy. I don't know what channels they went through to go back to the Confederacy, but there were the boats that were waiting for this merchandise out in the Gulf of Mexico were the channels through which the money went back to the Confederacy. Yes, the merchants along the river made their cut, but there were hundreds of boats out in the Gulf of Mexico waiting for this material, and they were able to sell that merchandise and then put the money back into the coffers.
All right, I got one last question over here.
Who was buying that cotton? Was it England? Was it the northern textile manufacturers in America? Or was it, because were there really no mills down south? Or was it Mexico or South America? Who was buying all that cotton?
Definitely England, definitely the North. We were buying it, I'm from New Jersey, so I identify with the North. But yes, they were countries from all over the world, and things were going through other Mediterranean countries, not Mediterranean, Caribbean countries. So yes, anybody who could get their hands on it was buying it. They were ships from all over the world.
I found it fascinating studying some of your information. Laredo is now the largest inland port in the entire world. And it's sort of ironic that it was such an important port for the Confederacy to finance its war effort.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Anyway, everybody, thank you for coming tonight. Give a big round of applause to Roseann Bacha-Garza. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for inviting me.
After John,
What's that?
after
What's that?
After they took control of Mississippi, was that worth anything?
Oh yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. No, the Union took control of Brownsville, and Laredo became massively
I'm
important.
talking about once the Union cut Mississippi, cut Texas off, cut the whole
No,
trans-Mississippi.
because all the trans-Mississippi cotton was going down through Laredo into Mexico and out to England.
Really, it was the arms and the ammunition.
Louisiana was tons of cotton.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is, after to the money, selling them, I question how much they sell them money.
Diverted from North Carolina, from Charleston, from New Orleans, and it all starts going through Laredo, not Morris.
Until they cut the Mississippi.
No,
Because it was really difficult. Once they got Mexico, there wasn't
no, because you could go down south through the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico was gone. They couldn't control all that. Rio Grande dumps into the Gulf, and then you go down around the south end of the Gulf, along the border of South America.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is, I don't think the money was as important as the equipment that was being traded for.
Oh, sure.
That's what I'm saying.
Of course,
So,
it was a massive part. That's what I don't think people realize. Is like they were buying guns, they were buying ammo, they were buying casings. Everybody was shipping everything through there. It's like this little town became this like massive